Hi, welcome to my podcast, Reclaim. I am your host, Thaís Sky. I have supported women navigate the complexities of being human for over 10 years. This podcast is where I disseminate some of those learnings and offer thoughts and guests to guide you into your healing. Welcome. Hello, Bella. Hello, Bella. Hello, beautiful humans. It's Thaís. Welcome to Reclaim. Happy to be here. I have a phenomenal guest here with all of me. Well, maybe I should just restart this. No, I'm not going to restart this. Hi, Thaís Sky here. Welcome to Reclaim the podcast. I have a really incredible guest here. I loved this conversation that I had with Dawn about sex and intimacy and the ways in which we deprive ourselves of pleasure and connection. Oh, it's such a brilliant conversation. Dawn is such an incredible human. I highly recommend checking out her work. All of the links are in the show notes. But before we get into the interview, we are knee deep in worthiness season, my friends. We are in worthiness season. If you're following me on Instagram, we're talking a lot about worth. I'm sharing a lot of content and information about navigating the worthiness wound, tending to this very special, sometimes painful, often painful space within our hearts, and how we can get out of our own way. So if you're not following me on Instagram at I am Thaís Sky, come join me there. And I want to make sure that I am letting you all know that doors are now open for my group program, Worthy Women Rise. I have done a 5-month series, a 5-month offering and a year-long offering. And right now the doors are open for my 5-month offering. So you get 13 really incredible modules to support you and tend to your worth. You also get a really incredible supportive group container to make sense of the modules in the context of your life. You get support from me. You get support from other like-minded women. It's a really special opportunity to finally gain the tools necessary to learn how to stop being so overwhelmed with people-pleasing tendencies, perfectionistic tendencies, and all of the ways that we prioritize other people's perception of us or other people's needs above our own. Worthy Women Rise is particularly great for women who are wanting to learn how to be vulnerable, wanting to learn how to navigate their pain and understand the origins of why they are the way they are. Worthy Women Rise is wonderful for women who identify as sensitive and who kind of feel like the world isn't made for them and want to find ways of relating to themselves with more self-acceptance and more compassion. And Worthy Women Rise is definitively made for women who want to take their healing journey to the next step. They've done the books, they've done these kind of more lighter kind of introductions to healing, and they're ready to start to go into some deeper stuff. You can learn more about the program at worthywomenrise.com. Right now, we are about halfway full. And if you have any questions, you're welcome to email me at info@thaissky.com. But the website, worthywomenrise.com, will have all of the information that you need on there, as well as the application for you to join this cohort. I'm really looking forward to being on this journey with this group of women. I haven't opened a new cohort in 2021. So this is my first cohort in 18 months. And it's just such an exciting opportunity to be on this journey with these incredible humans. And the reason why I wanted to schedule or to launch this interview with Dawn right now, this week, is because pleasure is a really important component of worth. It's actually very hard for us to receive pleasure and to receive in general, receive abundance, receive love, receive support, receive in any which way when we are so feeling so unworthy. I'm not good enough yet. I will allow myself to get support. I will allow myself to do things differently once I am more worthy, more skilled, more competent, more confident. And so the two really go hand in hand. And that's why pleasure is a really wonderful module within Worthy Women Rise, where we explore pleasure, not in the context yet of relationships. That's a different module where we talk about boundaries and we talk about attachment. But the pleasure module is really about how can we infuse more joy, pleasure, creativity in our lives? And what must we negotiate internally in order to create space for that? And so it feels a little paradoxical, right? That in order for you to feel like you are worthy of joining a program like Worthy Women Rise, you do have to have already a little semblance of worth, of you're ready for this and you're allowed to have support and you don't have to figure this all out on your own. And so it's like chicken or the egg situation, right? Like what comes first, cultivating worth or allowing pleasure? And I tend to see them as co-created, as both. And the more we infuse pleasure in our lives, the more we find a sense of worth and like we are allowed to receive this type of pleasure. And then the more that we cultivate worth, the more pleasure and support we can allow in our lives. So they go hand in hand. And that's why Worthy Women Rise is created the way it's created, in that you don't have to feel worthy of all of the things. You just have to take that very first step. You just have to apply. You just have to trust the process. You just have to go in with as much of an open mind as possible. And then the work will happen. We'll take it to the next step, but in that next step, we'll do it together, because you don't have to figure it all out alone. But in this conversation with Dawn, we take pleasure to a slightly different direction, where we talk about pleasure specifically as it relates to sex and intimacy and connection and relationship. And I, of course, love taking a relational lens on pleasure and thinking about the ways in which we really how pleasure and sex and intimacy is a really quite advanced relational skill. And so this conversation with Dawn kind of gives you may give you some insight into how you can cultivate more pleasure in your relationships. This conversation, I know I keep saying it, but it was really, really wonderful. And I'm really excited for you to listen to it. And so just a little introduction to Dawn. Dawn Serra is a therapeutic sex and relationship coach and pleasure advocate. As a white, cis, middle-class, queer, fat survivor, Dawn's work is a fiercely compassionate invitation for each of us to deepen our relationship with our bodies and our pleasure as an antidote to the trauma, disconnection, and isolation so many of us feel. Your pleasure matters. Your body is so wise. And Dawn's work is all about creating spaces and places for you to explore what that means on your terms. Beautiful. You can learn more about Dawn at dawnserra.com. The link is in the show notes, as well as the link to Worthy Women Rise. Enjoy this conversation. Let it infuse your life with a little bit of pleasure and joy, because I know that's what it did for me. And I look forward to hearing your thoughts on it on Instagram at I am Thaís Sky. Hi, Dawn. Welcome to Reclaim the Podcast.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to this very much.
I'm so excited you're here. I don't know how long I've known you. I feel like I've been aware of you. I've been following your work. I think we got connected on Facebook. Mm-hmm. Oh, I want to say maybe 2 years, maybe 3 years. So it's been a little bit of a time that I've known about you and just have celebrated you from afar. And I'm glad that we have finally had this moment to kind of connect. And now I get to celebrate you near.
Yes, same. It has been at least a couple of years, if not a little bit more, that, yeah, I've been seeing the wonderful work you do and adoring your social media game, and to get to actually have a human interaction outside of social media feels like a treat. Yeah, it's so nice. Well, I wanted to have you on the podcast because, one, you're brilliant. And two, I think the things that you talk about need amplification. Like, I want us to spend more time, I think, as a culture, as humans, talking about pleasure. And I would love to maybe start our conversation with, like, I imagine you get this question a lot, but I think it's a good question to ask. Like, what got you into talking about this stuff? Like, out of all of the things that you can talk about, like, just a little bit of your story of, like, what has led you to become so passionate in talking about this stuff. Yeah. What a long, winding road. I mean, I think really it starts with, I was raised in a house where my mom was a hippie and, was really open about bodies and information. And, I was born in the really late 70s. And so she had had a lot of fun in the early 70s herself. And she was also working in the medical field. And so she had a lot of medical textbooks. And so from a very young age, I could just pull these medical textbooks off the shelf and look at pictures. And, I saw birthing pictures and circumcision pictures, and she had all kinds of books about, like, where babies come from. And so it was just a very, like, open kind of, it was normal for me. You know, she was naked all the time and bodies were bodies. And when I got into specifically high school, really is when I realized that I had a lot more comfort talking about the things that my friends really struggled to talk about. And so I was a source of information, and my friends would come to me, you know, how do I, or can you buy for me? And it just felt, I don't know, like a great experience of being able to have those kinds of conversations with my friends around masturbation and sex and, you know, feeling nervous, but not feeling ashamed to buy condoms for friends. And then in my early 20s, I went to one of those sex toy parties that are like a Tupperware party, you know, and had a really good time. And the woman who was running the party kind of pulled me aside afterwards and said, I think you'd be really good at this because of just how you were in this. Would you be interested in that? And my girlfriend at the time, I kind of went home and said, hey, this person thinks I'd be good at this. What are your thoughts? And she was like, well, what if I buy you the starter kit, you know, because total MLM, you know, buy you the starter kit. And so for a number of years, I ran this sex toy company on the side where I was selling sex toys and educating people about their bodies and working with corporate. Yeah, it was so fun. And you know, I worked at a Fortune 150 in IT for 17 years and on the side had this sex toy business and it got so big. I had to decide, like, am I going to become self-employed or do I want to stick with the corporate job and the healthcare? And at the time I wasn't quite ready to be an entrepreneur. And so I shut it down, but it never really left me, like how fun it was, how comfortable it was for me, how hungry people were to be able to ask the scary questions. You know, I had people coming in and talking to me and saying, I've never been able to ask somebody this. And I'm in my 30s or my 40s or whatever it was. And so then I really started getting education. And a friend of mine said one day, like, I'd love to start a podcast about sex. She's a lesbian or is a lesbian. And she said, I feel like there's too many people that are giving advice that's not actually like really rooted in understanding how people have sex. And so we started our podcast, Sex Gets Real, and it took off almost immediately. And people started asking for one-on-one support. And so I did, you know, trainings and certifications to become a coach. And, you know, now I'm moving into like the mental health side of things, but I've been doing this now for about 7 years, and it's just kind of been a slow evolution. And of course, my own experiences have been all over the board, from sexual violence to relationships with people of all different genders and experiences with kink. And so, you know, being able to kind of bring all that together has been a really interesting process.
We definitely had a different childhood. Remember I got a teen magazine when I was a preteen, and that was already salacious enough, you know, to get like a teen magazine. And like there was a Q&A like on the magazine, and it was like, is masturbation okay? Like, am I allowed to masturbate? Something along those lines. And instead of reading the fucking paragraph, decide it would be a good idea to immediately ask my mom, hey mom, what's masturbation? And, you know, I don't think my parents are clearly caught off guard. They had no idea how to answer this question, which is so fair given our cultural reluctance to talk about sex. And they clearly didn't think I was age appropriate to know what masturbation was. And so their way of dealing with it was to sit me down on the kitchen table very seriously and be like, I want you to forget that word. That word is, you know, like that's not a word that you're supposed to know right now. And what they actually did was make it even more in my mind, right? Because then I immediately, Dawn, went to school the next day and been like, does everybody know what masturbation is? Because I do, you know? And so like I became that girl in 5th grade telling all of my little classmates what masturbation was because I ended up finishing the paragraph that literally told you what it was. Anyway, so I think that maybe your upbringing was a little bit more open than mine. And it seems like it really kind of fostered the ability, the space to talk about it. And I'm imagining that you're more in touch with this than maybe even I am, how hard it is to talk about.
Yeah.
And how much shame, to even the smallest thing. I think so many of us feel like we're so alone in it, and it's so scary, and there's no one to talk about this. It's like money is, I think, another one, but this is even more personal because it's our bodies. And so I imagine that you probably see a lot of dissociated humans, right? A lot of humans who are completely removed from their own body, struggling to then de-shame themselves around pleasure and sex.
Yeah, one of the things that I learned much later, I'd say probably in like my early 30s, really, was that even though I had been raised in a house that talked about sex a lot, in middle school, my mom told me about like a threesome she had had. So I learned what a threesome was, and she talked about the sex she had with different boys, and there was definitely like a performative aspect to it. Like she was proud of having been really popular and had these experiences. And I realized that even though I was really comfortable talking about sex, I had still been raised to talk about sex in a very performative way. Right. And it took me quite a while to begin really teasing out just how deeply we perform sex, how rarely we actually experience sex for ourselves and with each other, and how so much of what people are chasing and hoping to achieve is based on like comparison and externalized stories and beliefs around this is how we should do it. This is how I should look. And so it makes it so complicated that so often people want to start kind of figuring things out. Like, why is this so hard for me? Why can't I orgasm? Why is this painful? And often what we bump up against first is that so many of the narratives that people have are really about objectifying themselves.
Yeah.
Right. Yes. And so there's kind of multiple layers of work before we can even get to like, what does this even mean for you and your body? There has to be some grief work that has to happen around maybe this isn't how my body works. And then what becomes possible?
Yeah. And I know from working with couples and individuals that we get a lot of this stuff from the media of like, what is a healthy relationship? Healthy relationship equals having sex 3 to 4 times a week or whatever the number is, and there's this kind of metric that where did we get that? Where are we getting this information from? Right. And yet we're then using it to compare how our relationship is, and what how our sex life should look and how we should feel pleasure. And when we don't, I know that we tend to then collapse into, if I don't know, then it must mean that there's something wrong with me. And then there's the shame, and then we don't talk about it. So then we don't get help. And so then we're kind of like stuck in this pattern of feeling really isolated and cut off from something that can be, for many of us, quite good, right? Quite delicious and pleasurable and fun.
Yeah, it can be such a place of creativity, play, connection, release. But in order to experience that, we often have to be willing to be awkward, to seem silly, to ask and share scary or vulnerable things. And we don't have a lot of modeling for that culturally. I really do see sex so much as a skill. And we have people around us who model ways of talking and body language and so many aspects of how we relate, but we really don't have places where we can learn about really like embodied experiential sex. We've got like porn, TV, and I mean, I love porn. I think it can be a fantastic tool in our toolkit, especially like feminist and queer porn. But, most people don't see feminist and queer porn because they're going for the free stuff.
Right.
And then, TVs and movies, romance novels and books, magazines.
Those are the worst.
Right.
I mean, there is not a single sex scene that I have watched on movies or television that is in any way, shape, or form realistic.
Right.
It's just, and 9 times out of 10, there's no way that woman orgasm
No.
if we're talking about heterosexual sex.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just.
Yeah.
And then how are we supposed to learn? How are we supposed to learn that this is a skill, that this is learnable, and that it requires a lot of humility and vulnerability and conversations.
Yeah. And I think what's layered on top of that too is because pleasure is an experience of the body, then when we're talking about sex with other people, you know, of course we can have sex with ourselves and it can be fantastic and playful and wonderful. But when we're talking about sex with other people, now we're talking about 2 or more people's stories about their bodies and how they feel about them and the cultural expectations, you know, based on gender and ability. And our bodies are constantly changing. And I think that's another place where a lot of my clients, especially, are struggling is my body experienced pleasure and sex a certain way until I reached this age. And then it started changing and I just want to go back, right? There's this longing and this grief for things to be like they were because it's scary to change. But we're constantly changing. Our bodies do funny things and secrete things and smell things. And I think another thing that makes, you know, sex both wonderful, but also complicated is we ourselves are swimming in an ocean of misinformation and myths and stereotypes and expectations, but so are the people that we're engaging in sex with. And they also have stories and expectations and shame. And so even when we do the work ourselves to begin setting down what we don't want to carry and finding our way to our truth, it becomes so complicated when then we go to a partner or a lover and we're bumping up against their stuff. And now we're having to navigate their internalized expectations and shame. So it's complicated, you know, and I think that's something that makes people want to avoid it. But on the other side of some of that can be extraordinary just opportunities for joy and delight and goodness.
Well, I think sex is such a great intersection that rubs up against this idea of transactional relationship, right, versus relational. And that maybe when you're saying like performative sex, we could also possibly label that as transactional sex, where it's just, I do what I feel, I do what feels good. You do what feels good. We're just kind of bumping the goodness, right? And trying to get something out of the person so that we feel good, or even give, but it's still, it's not really taking in the person's fullness or our fullness, whereas more the relational sex requires in it intimacy, communication, and all of those other things, and navigating these complicated ideas that the person and that we have about sex and intimacy.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that it's especially for women who are having sex with cis men specifically, there is so much that gets bumped up against because of like patriarchy and sexism and misogyny. You know, I mean, when we're talking about someone whose erections are changing or someone who believes that this is something that I've seen a lot in recent years that's really, really frustrating to my clients is men who want to be seen as really skillful and good lovers. And so their identity is tied to being able to give women orgasms. And it's not actually about the partner and how their body is or what they want. It's about the achievement so that I can still feel like good about myself. And so we're trying to kind of like find our way through these things without talking about it really directly and openly and asking questions and saying, that actually really doesn't work for me. So can we find something that works for me? And having places where we can feel the feelings and practice, you know, that's what I really love doing is working with people so that they can say the scary things and see the world doesn't fall apart.
Right.
You know, that someone doesn't run screaming from the room and, okay, so maybe I can begin doing this. And
part of vulnerability is being able to deal with rejection, right? To be able to be told like, hey, what you're doing isn't up to snuff, and it's not personal, and I'm not making it mean anything bad about you, but that we have an area here where we can work on together. That can be that's like an advanced relational skill. And then add the layers of sex. I mean, it's no wonder so many of us struggle with having a really thriving sex life. It really requires us to put all of our most advanced mastered skills to the test. And many of us aren't in that place of advanced mastered skills.
Yeah, that's and one of the things that I work a lot with my clients and the people who come through my courses is often, and we do this in all kinds of areas of our life, but we're really good at doing this when it comes to our relationships and sex specifically, is when something doesn't feel good. If we haven't had any kind of practice or foundation laying, we just try and like jump in to like varsity level stuff. And then when it all falls apart, we think, see, I knew this was going to happen, and we never do it again. So, it's like, what are like 10 steps before that? Can we just sit around the breakfast table and like ask each other about the kinds of porn we like to watch, or talk about like our favorite sexual memories, or, what's a fantasy that you've always had? And it doesn't mean we're going to do it, but can we just even talk about those things?
Right.
And then as we build those skills, we can move towards the more tender, the more personal things. And I think too, when it comes to our relationships and navigating things with sex, there is often a real rigidity that we have because of all the messages we've internalized that sex has to look a very particular way.
Yes.
And if it doesn't, or if my body can't do that, something needs to be quote unquote fixed.
Yes.
And so one of the things that I really love helping people to find is like intense creativity. What if we just threw the rule book out and we just focused on what feels good? Maybe genitals aren't involved at all. But how amazing to know that. And now you've got all this goodness you can explore. So, it's definitely a site of a lot of like erotic, creative energy. But we do need to do a little bit of foundation laying. It's pretty hard to go to someone. And I think this is another place that like a lot of people listening might feel a little tenderness around, is sometimes we don't realize something doesn't really work for us until it's been happening for a really long time. Because we just thought that was normal, or we were trying to be nice. It seemed really important to a partner. And I've had a number of clients over the years who are, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years into a relationship and realize I actually really, really dislike the way my partner does this thing. And they do it all the time. And that's a hard thing, right?
Yeah,
that's a hard thing, because understandably, if someone comes to you and says, that thing that I've been telling you I like for 10 years, I don't actually like, that does feel like a betrayal. Yeah. It feels like I've been doing something wrong. And so now we have to navigate those feelings. So there needs to be a lot of like basic foundation laying and practice before we move into those things. But so often we just go right for the pain. The hard thing, and then nobody's skilled and the whole world falls apart.
Everyone's dysregulated.
Yeah, exactly.
Disaster. There are a couple things that I see in my clinical work that I don't know about surprise, that I didn't anticipate hearing so often. And having heard it so often, I can now look back and be like, oh yeah, no duh. One, how often women experience vaginal tightness, tight pelvic floor. We often talk about loose vaginas, like that's a thing, and like tightening your Kegels and that thing. But we don't hear too often how many women have experienced or are experiencing a tightness, a constriction, a vaginismus, a sense of nothing can go in there and it's painful. Penetration is painful. And I'm just saying it out loud right now, and in witness to you, that this is more common than most women think about. And the thing that I have had to come to terms with, because it's not often talked about, is that we don't often have a lot of resources.
Yes.
We don't know that a pelvic floor PT, for example, can become our best friend, right?
Yes.
And nobody even hears that much about pelvic floor PTs unless it's about pregnancy, and And so that was number one. But number two, and the one that I would love to hear a little bit your thoughts on, is how often partners are mismatched in terms of libidinal desires, right?
Yep.
How it just so happens that we find ourselves in relationship with people that want something totally different. Yeah. And this happens quite a lot. And one of the things I don't think we talk about a lot. And I'm curious to hear, like, how have you seen this, and how do couples navigate this?
Mismatched desire and libido, I think, is far more the rule than it's not. I would say almost all long-term partnered relationships, whether you're monogamous or polyamorous or what your dynamics are, long-term relationships with folks, regardless of how many, I think mismatched libido and desire emerges very commonly. And there's a number of reasons for that. If we're talking about heterosexual relationships, I've found that mismatched libido and desire is often happening because of unequal emotional labor happening in the relationship. If I'm doing a lot of emotional caretaking for my partner, if I'm their only source of like vulnerability and intimacy because they're like a dude and they don't talk to their dude friends like that, that can become this burden that makes it feel like I'm responsible for this other person and I have to show up for them. And I'm the one that remembers in my head all the things we need at the store. And so when we're talking about that, and then you add motherhood on top of it, like Graham Seabrook, talks about the mother load a lot. It's real hard to feel like sexy and cute when I've got a to-do list of 753 things in my head and my partner has one, or two. And so like low level resentment. But I also think it's because we're in bodies that are constantly changing, and stress, the pandemic, all kinds of things impact our experiences of being present with ourselves and with our bodies. And we're all going to be having different experiences of energy levels, how well we slept that night, the nutrients we've taken in, how supported we feel. And it's really rare for two human beings who have complex inner worlds and outer worlds to be on the same level, especially once you've moved out of like that new relationship energy. Yeah. And real life kind of sets in. And I think too, something else that a lot of people don't know, and I highly recommend that everyone read Emily Nagoski's Come As You Are. I think it's the best book when you're talking about libido and desire. But so often early in relationships, we have a little bit more of spontaneous desire. We're kind of always aroused. And so sex feels really easy and playful for a lot of us. But most of us honestly have responsive desire. And Emily Nagoski talks about that, like, how you make plans with friends to go to a party, non-COVID times. And you're like, yeah, that sounds so fun. And then the night of the party comes and you're like, I have to put pants on. It's cold. I have to get there. Like, I'm just not going to go. But if you make yourself go and you spend a couple of minutes there and you start having fun, yay, let's stay at the party. I'm having a great time. I'm finally here. But I had to kind of get over that little bit of that dread hump. Yeah. Responsive desire is a little bit like that, where it's kind of like, it's not until things start actually happening and you're like, wait, no, this actually feels really good. Let's keep going. But often there's kind of like, I'm not really feeling it until something happens. Our bodies are responding to stimulus rather than generating the stimulus. And so learning more about that kind of really helps shift people away from shame. And I think one of the other things that I've found really helps people who have that mismatched desire is getting so much more expansive in your understanding of how we can connect with each other erotically. Like if maybe you're not up for intercourse, but you'd be up for lovingly touching your partner while they touch themselves, or watching an erotic film together and then, sex toys come out, or maybe you're just really in need of a massage. And then maybe if you start feeling sexy. So really being able to expand the possible inroads and just ways to feel good together. Nobody says we all have to be naked at the same time and using all the same body parts, or areas of our body. One person can be clothed and whispering sexy things or reading a book out loud while the other one is masturbating, or, all kinds of different things. But because we have so much shame and rigidity around it, we often don't see that there's lots of ways that we can work with how our bodies are instead of trying to force ourselves to be how we wish they would be.
Yeah. And this is, I think, a taste of the creativity that you were talking about before, that things can look so different, and it doesn't just have to look one way, and I also co-signed that book. I read that book for sex therapy class that I had to take for my grad school program. And it's a great book. And I think what you're really onto something, that it's, because people experience that spontaneous arousal at the beginning, they tend to think that it has to be that way throughout the relationship, or something is wrong. And what I appreciate about that book is that it not only is that that spontaneous arousal is a phase, and that doesn't mean that there's something wrong, but also that this is work, right? There is a level of commitment and prioritizing intimacy and feel good within a relationship, or else it's just not going to happen.
Yep.
And I think that can be really frustrating for people who are accustomed to it just happening, or who, are busy and they don't want to slow down. Again, it goes back to that vulnerability. Like, this requires us to slow down, to be with ourselves, to be with our partner. And that requires turning off the television and turning off the social media. And that means being with ourselves, right?
Yep.
And all of that can be really, really hard. It can be wonderful and pleasurable, but there is a taste, a work element in it. And that's part of the thing. And I think people don't like that so much.
Yeah.
They want it to just be easy and drunk sex, and like, boom, fireworks and sparks and whatever. And it's not very movie-like.
Exactly that. Because, I think one of the things that's really hard for people to really truly take in is what we're seeing in the media is for entertainment. It's not a documentary that represents how lives happen. And that often when we talk to our friends, there is a performative aspect to the storytelling, right? We're dramatizing how great it is or how terrible it is. And part of that is because we love telling stories. It's a way we connect with other humans. But just because our friends are telling us about their sex lives, it doesn't mean that's actually what their inner world experiences necessarily. It's the edited version that they're willing to share with you. And so we compare ourselves to those edited stories and those entertainment stories. And, and when we do see, especially in pop culture, folks who are scheduling sex or, asking for support with the kids, it's usually done like comedically, making fun of people who do that or making it seem ultra unsexy. So we have those narratives that like something must be wrong if I'm having to schedule sexy time. But in fact, that is often one of the best ways to actually make it happen is prioritizing it, just like date night, right? And just because we schedule sexy time doesn't mean you have to have the sex, but that time gets to be an opportunity for some playful talking, some playful touching, maybe just pressing your bodies together and seeing how that feels, and then getting to collaborate together to see like what feels true for us tonight.
Yeah.
Maybe it's something with mouths only or hands, or maybe just laying naked together and feeling the warmth of our bodies feels really erotically connected. And that's all we have to do. It doesn't have to become more. But when we've got that time and the opportunity, I think that that's one thing that a lot of people learn when they go to like sex therapy or sex coaching is if you want it to happen, one, investigating why, and two, actually making it a priority. And that's a hard thing to do when we've got so many demands on our time.
Yes, 100%. 100%. And it goes right back to what you were talking about before about like performative sex. Like it is in some ways easier to have sex with a stranger, than it is to have sex with your husband or to have sex with your wife, because now we're intercoursing, right? We're penetrating. I'm using that language as a metaphor for what we're really doing, which is intimacy and connection. And I think many of us are absolutely terrified of intimacy and connection. And, in many ways we can understand from that point of view why affairs are, for some people, it feels more like an answer because there's something about the stranger. I see it, again, tying it to my clinical work. It's interesting how in the first few sessions with a new client, they can be much more vulnerable with me than 6 months, 9 months, a year into our work together. And it's like, why can you be more vulnerable at the beginning? And it's because I'm a stranger, because you don't know me yet. We don't have a relationship yet. So you don't have to be in the anxiety of what will I think, because it's a stranger. But it's important for us to learn these skills if we want to have that long-term kind of gratifying, intimate relationship.
Yeah. And I think we also need to really investigate what sex means to us, and one of the things that I've discovered in doing work, especially with heterosexual couples, is that often for men, they use sex as a way to feel close to humans, as a way to get to be vulnerable, as a way to share themselves. And when there isn't friendships and support that offer those things, sex becomes the way to feel belonging, to feel seen. And that can place so much pressure on a partner that, like, if I have to have sex in order to feel loved, then when my partner isn't up for sex, I'm not lovable.
Yeah.
I'm rejected at a deep, deep soul level, like a wounding level. And so then it becomes a thing that there's, that we're becoming, manipulative around, right? Tricking our partners, guilting our partners, pouting when we don't get it, behaving in ways that might make a person give in, right? And that's not the kind of language we want to talk about when we're talking about, our bodies and co-creating something. But that's what happens is if you say no, and I feel like it's a deep soul rejection of my worth, because that's the only way that I know how to connect with someone in a loving way, then your no is not something I can accept.
Yeah.
I have to find another way.
Right. And then I think the opposite tends to also happen, that the partner then tends to withhold sex as punishment.
Yeah.
Right. And that tends to be the dynamic, because the partner then knows that if they withhold this, that they're essentially making the partner feel worthless. And that may be a way in which the partner feels, finally, you're feeling what I'm feeling, or what I've been feeling, and how you make me feel when you use me in this way. And so it plays out this dynamic. And it's one of my reasons why I love couples work, is because we start to see how both parties really get into it's like gears. They get into a groove, and then they just play out their shit with each other. And it's almost never one person.
No. Yeah. There's unspoken needs. There's, and that is one of the things. Often it's like, the person that is being expected to give themselves, right, often has for years struggled to just be direct about this doesn't feel good. I know the question is coming with expectations, so it doesn't actually feel like a choice. Can we talk about how we can make this actually a real choice? Or here's what I need, so that, those things those things are just being internalized and pressed down. And so it really does become so important being able to find ways to say, here's what I need, here's what I like, here's how I would love for us to set time aside for this. How can we make this more playful? It just becomes more and more rigid, more constricted, more painful, more avoidance. And then there's all kinds of other wounds that are happening on top of that. So it becomes a process, right, of being able to heal and practice new skills. And I think a lot of people just want that. We sell media by promising people those listicles of ways to have mind-blowing sex, right? 10 ways to have the best sex of your life, the 3 tricks that'll guarantee your partner orgasms. And part of why people like that is because they want to believe that there's just an answer.
Oh, that's true for any listicle.
Right, exactly. Like if I just know how to move my tongue or do the thing with my hand, I won't have to do the vulnerable thing of actually asking them what they like. And then adjusting my behavior and my actions based on your feedback, right? Most of us don't have that kind of skill. So we're trying to find those shortcuts so that we don't have to feel that vulnerability and that potential rejection. And, that just means we go longer and longer and longer without actually really knowing the person.
And I get frustrated when people talk about sex being a symptom. Like, oh, your lack of sex life is a symptom for something wrong in your relationship. And I get frustrated because I don't think that's the full picture. I think that it's that both and. It's that sex in and of itself is a skill set, is a whole, everything that we're talking about here right now is all that. And it's a part of a relational kind of complex, nuanced web, that it's a symptom and it's also the cause. That it's, if we, because the reason why I feel like those types of sentiments really, it makes it sound like then sex should just be easy. Like the sex is an afterthought, right? That if your relationship is healthy, then the afterthought, sex, it just happens. And everything that you're sharing with me and with all of us listening right now is that actually sex requires some thought and then that's okay. And then, and that it's when we give something love and thought that it can become better.
Yeah. And it can really become ours, not like what we've been told it can be. I mean, you can have an incredibly meaningful, deep, rich, erotically expressed relationship where maybe you're only engaging in sexual activities once a month or once every few months, but you've come to a place where that feels true for you. Just like you can be having sex all the time and feel empty, disconnected, used. Right. So I think that's another place of, it's not about frequency or orgasms or exactly right. It's about, are we using this as a way to feel really good? All of us that are involved, and what does that look like? And how do we get there? And what would you like to try? And
that things get to be different, right? You're saying that what you need today may be different than what you need tomorrow. And that maybe today, a 30-second bang, quick bang, bang and quick could be exactly what you need. And then, tomorrow you may want to just press bodies together. And then the next day you may want an hour of lovemaking stuff. I mean, whatever, that we have versatility and flexibility and that it can look different and that we can really ask the questions of what do I want right now? What do you want right now? And how do we line that up together?
And I think too, like as we lay that foundation and practice those skills, we begin to have a much bigger, more joy-filled toolbox of tools that we might use. A great example is a couple of weeks ago, I'm in perimenopause right now. So my body and my libido are all over the place. It feels foreign. It's weird, but I'm getting through. And a couple of weeks ago, I felt really aroused, just like kind of out of the blue. And so I turned to Alex, who's my husband, and I said, I'm feeling really aroused right now. Do you want to help me do something about that? And his response was like, I'd love to do something for you, because he wasn't in a mood to receive at that particular moment. And so then we went and we did something that was really sexy for me, and it was hot and awesome. And there's other times where I'm kind of thinking like, wow, it's been a little while since like I've touched him in a really like caring, beautiful, sexy way. And I'll say, I would really like to touch you in this way. And like, I'm not aroused when I make that offer, but I love getting to touch him and see his responses. And so, it's just like an enjoyable thing that's not necessarily driven by sexual desire. But then once we get going, it's usually like, okay, this is fun. Let's do some more with this. But it's just making a conscious choice. Like, it's been a little while. I'd really like to connect with you in a meaningful, special, intimate way. So what if I did this? Or what if we did this later tonight? And if it's a yes or if it's a no, it doesn't matter as much as just being able to share and articulate and then decide what actually feels good for both of us.
Right.
Sometimes it's a yes and sometimes it's a like, ooh, put a pin in that. Maybe we can revisit that tomorrow. I've got a little bit of a tummy ache right now. I'd be like, okay. But we still had that flirty little exchange.
Right. Right. Yeah. That even that gets to be something fun. It doesn't have to be like a rejection. It can be like, okay, well, the offer's on the table. It doesn't have to be so destructive that the no and the yes can just be a part of the play.
Right. Yeah.
I love that. This has been such a good conversation. I'm like bummed that we have to wrap this up, but I'm really glad that we got to spend this time talking about this subject. I know that this is your world and that this is kind of like what you do all day, every day, but I can't recall the last time I talked about sex on Reclaim, and I've been wanting to, and I've been wanting to talk about pleasure because this is a part of worth too, feeling worthy, feeling enough, feeling, like this is what that looks like too. And so thank you so much for being here and for sharing your thoughts. And I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. I can't believe how fast the time went by.
I know.
And I'm just so grateful we got to do a little exploring, and hopefully your listeners get really excited by some new ideas and questions.
Maybe they get aroused. Who knows?
Exactly.